Well, hello and welcome again to our reading of Thucydides, Book 1, the Pentacontaitia, and we're up to chapter 110. Huto men tarton helenon pragmata ephthare hex ete polymesanta. And thus the affairs of the Greeks, Ephthare were ruined, having fought for 6 years. This is, of course, in Egypt. The disaster in Egypt was not really played up, and the loss of forces was not really played up by Thucydides, but it must have been a major disaster, and it may, some scholars think, have been the catalyst for the movement of the collection of tribute from Delos to Athens in 454. So thus the affairs were ruined after they'd fought for 6 years. Kai oligoi apopollon, let's keep that in mind. So few from many, poruomenoi, dietes libues, es korenan sothesan. And a few going through Libya into Cyrene were saved, but hyplastai apollonto, but the majority perished. Aiguptos de palin hupa basilea egeneto plain amotaiu tu en tois helesin basileos. And Egypt again became under the control of the king, except for Amatius, the king in the marshes. This is from Top Helos, third declension neuter. So in the marshlands, this is up in the delta. Teuton de diamegathos te tu helus u dunan to Helene. But they were not able, Helene, to take this man because of the size of the marsh. Genitive there. Kaihama makiamotatoi esinton aiguption hoi helaioi. And at the same time, the marsh men, the men of the marshes, the men of the marshlands, are the most warlike of the Egyptians. Inaras de libuon basilius hostapante epraxi perites aiguptu prodosiai lefthes anestarothe. But Inaros, the king of the Libyans, the very one who Epraxe perhaps engineered, he's the one who did all these things, who engineered all the affairs regarding Egypt. Lefthes, from Eros Passive from Lambano, having been taken pro dossier by treachery, so he was betrayed. Pro didomi is to betray, to hand over someone. So having been taken by treachery, Anastarothé, he was crucified, which was the common practice of the Persians. Ekdeton Athenon kai tes ales sumakidos pentekonta trieres diadokoi pleusai es aigupton eskon katatop mendesion keras. Uk edotes ton gegon noton uden. But from Athens and from the other alliance, a diadokos. Now, the diadokoi probably here means coming in relief. A diadokos is a successor, one who comes after the other. Here is probably in the sense of a relief fleet. So 50 triremes from Athens and from the rest of their alliance coming to relieve them, sailing into Egypt. Now, this is a technical term here, I think, eskon kata. We have to understand as ships or something, they held the ships in the direction of the keras, probably here for stoma, in the sense of it's one of the mouths of the Nile, and it's the one in the direction of Mendes, the city of Mendes, so the Mendesian keras. So it's literally here, sailing into Egypt, they kept their ships, or they sailed almost, along the Mendesian branch of the Nile, so not knowing anything of the things which had taken place. There's a little epsilon, didn't print very well there. Not knowing anything of the things that had taken place. Kai autois ek teges epipesontes pedzoi kai ek thalases phoenikon nautikon diaphthyron tas palas ton neon. And by land, a land army, pedzoi, having attacked them, and by sea, the naval force of the Phoenicians destroyed most of their ships, but the lesser number escaped back. So they got attacked by land and by sea. Many of their ships were destroyed, but the fewer, from Elassone, the fewer of them fled back or escaped back. Tamen kataten megalen stratean Athenion kaiton sumakon es Aigupton hutos etelutesen. And thus the great campaign of the Athenians and their allies in Egypt, thus it came to an end. The tamen is sort of adverbial here. So in respect of these things, in regard to these things, and then we get this kata as well. So the things regarding the great campaign of the Athenians and the campaign of their allies in Egypt, thus it came to an end, as does chapter 110. And we'll move on to 111. And this section describes the expedition to Thessaly, which also, of course, was unsuccessful. Ek de Thessalias Orestes ha ekekratidou Phios to Thessalon Basileos Fugon epes en Athenios hiauton kat again. And Orestes, the son of Echecratides from Thessaly, the son of the king of the Thessalians. Notice when you've got the article with king for any other king except the king of Persia. King of Persia, you don't use the article. So the son of the king of Thessaly, Fugon, probably something like being an exile. So having going into exile, it's a present participle. So going into exile, we're not told why, he persuaded the Athenians, kat again hiauton, to reinstate him. Kat ago is the standard word you use for reinstating a ruler who's been kicked out or who's gone into exile. It's the standard term, so to reinstate him, reflexive because he's the subject of the sentence. Kai Paralabontes, and taking with him Boeotians and Phocians, who were allies, the Athenians campaigned against Pharsalus of Thessaly. And kai tes men ges ekratun hosame pros iontes polu ekton hoplon. And they got control of the country. Now we get this funny use of hossa here, so it's as much as, understand they could, not pro iontes, not advancing, not going ahead, not advancing very much, ekton hoplon, well, literally from their weapons, but generally I think we translate it here from their camp. So they didn't move very terribly far from where they were camped. They got control of the land, but only by not going very far from their camp. And we get an explanatory gar here. Hoi gar hippes ton Thessalon Aragon, for the cavalry of the Thessalians. Aragon is from that ergo root, meaning to restrain, to hem them in. Not to be confused with the verb of working. This is ergo, to hem in, fence in. Ten depolin uk helon, udalo procure autois uden hon henica estratusan. But they did not take the city, and then we get this funny expression here, nor was it successful, nor was anything else successful for them. Nothing, literally, of those things regarding which they made the campaign. So, nor did they succeed in any other matter on which they were campaigning. Allah apikoresan palin arestane contes apractoi. But they retreated, they withdrew from Anacorio back with Orestes apractoi, literally unachieving, so without success. Metadotauta upoloi husteron helioi Athenion epitas naos tasen pagais epibantes. After these things, afterwards not by much, so a short time after these things, helioi, 1,000 of the Athenians, epibantes, getting on board the ships, the ones in Pagae, and then little parenthesis here, they themselves held Pagae, periplusin as Sicuona, Pericleus to Xanthippou, Strateguntos. They sailed around into Sicyon, and then genitive absolute here with Pericles, the son of Xanthippus, as general. This is the first mention, certainly not the last, but the first mention of Pericles in Thucydides. Kai Apobantes, and having got out of the boat, having landed in a battle, Machae, they got control of those of the Sicyonians, pros Maxantes, who engaged with them. So they prevailed in battle against the Sicyonians who had engaged with them. This is from pros mignumi, literally to mingle with, but here to probably engage as a technical military term. Caiuthus paralabontes acaios kai diaplusantes perantes acananias es oiniadas estratusan kai epolioi kun umen toi helon gep al apicoresan ep oiku. And immediately taking along the Achaeans, and having sailed through Peran beyond the Acarnania and Oinidae, they campaigned and they began, this is imperfect here, so they began a siege. Umen toi helon get, not however get in fact did they take the city or the land, but they retreated ep oiku back home again. And when given no reasons as to why this happened. And that's the end of chapter 111.